Today's online gallery talk is in conjunction with a terrific exhibit entitled Subjects and Objects, Slavic Collections at Yale, 1896 to 2022. You are seeing and will see through the course of our time together a slideshow of revolving images drawn from the show. A bit of a proxy so that you can see those while we talk, and for those who are distant from New Haven and unable to see the show. The show is at the Hanke Gallery in Sterling Memorial Library. It's the second show in that fantastic new exhibition space that was dedicated and opened this year. The Hanke Gallery was designed and built for optimal display of primary source materials from across Yale Library's diverse collections and many repositories. And we'll hear today about items that come from many different parts of Yale Library. It's very exciting to have the Hanke Gallery, and it's really exciting to have the co-curators of its second show with us today. Anna is librarian for Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and Liliya is a PhD candidate in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literature. Together, they have put together a magnificent showcase that really exemplifies the breadth and depth of Yale Library holdings in this area. It is, for those who know the subjects, a great exposition of what is held here, and for the rest of us, many of us, a great introduction into the holdings. Today's format is going to consist of a conversation. I have a few questions to prompt Anna and Liliya, and then we'll also have time for questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A function to post your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. To start, to the two great co-curators, a basic question: what occasioned this exhibit?
Well, I can field that. The first part of our current century actually is sort of an interesting time for anniversaries when it comes to Slavic studies in particular. In 2017, we already had the centennial of the Russian Revolution. In 2022, we have the centennial of the official founding of the Soviet Union, which was established in December of 1922. And in sort of academic culture at large, we're coming across a number of 50th and 75th anniversaries of various Slavic departments, which were largely established across academic institutions in the US post-World War II, when the Cold War really began in earnest, and academic institutions began to see that there was a vested interest in studying Russia, Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, the various nations that comprised the Eastern Bloc. Our Slavic department at Yale was established in 1946, with its first chairman being René Wellick, the great specialist in comparative literature. This sort of 75th anniversary, which actually came upon us in 2021, coinciding with the establishment of the beautiful new exhibit space that allowed us to explore all of our collections in one place, seemed like the perfect place and time to think about what exactly are our Slavic collections? How were they built? When did they start? What directions did they move in once the collection was established? It should be mentioned that we do have one of the oldest Slavic collections in an academic library in the United States. 1896 was pretty early for an academic library to be interested in collecting Slavic literature, anything coming out of Russian and Eastern Europe, anything written in Slavic languages. And as a result, 2021 was also the 150th anniversary of sort of the establishment of the Slavic collection here. So basically a number of Jubilee occasions was the main reason that we chose to dive into this project, with the beautiful space that we had to showcase them being a close and very important second reason. So that is why we put this together for a start.
Terrific. And talk a little bit about, quote unquote, Slavic and Slavic collections. How are they defined? How do you define them? And how did you adjust the scope during your research for the exhibition itself?
So Liliya and I probably both have things to say about that, but sort of as a basic first answer, we're talking about a specific group of languages when we talk about Slavic collections, the Slavic languages, which of course includes Russian, which is the biggest language group that we collect at our library, and that's true at a lot of libraries that have collected in Slavic languages over the years. But it also consists of Ukrainian, Polish, Czech, the Bosnian, Serbo-Croatian languages, Slovene. These are all part of the Slavic family. However, part of the challenge that we encountered as we were putting together the exhibit and as we were conceptualizing how to even talk about it, the Slavic collection as a term has been used over time to encompass, again, given when it was sort of formally codified within the institution during the Cold War, it has been used to refer to places around the Eastern Bloc that do not speak Slavic languages, that were just part of the sort of Cold War opposition that the American institutions were largely interested in and invested in studying. So our Slavic collection, historically, as it was called that, included not just the Slavic languages, it also included materials in Hungarian and Romanian and the Baltic languages. These are very distinct and different language groups. This is to say nothing of the Central Asian republics, which were part of the Soviet Union. Those are mostly Turkic languages. So as a result, the Slavic collection, writ large, considered as a whole, consists of somewhere in the realm of 30 different language groups, or distinct languages, I should say. But clearly Slavic is sort of a misnomer to call all those places together. The contemporary reference that we use in my job title, for example, we call it the Slavic, East European, and Eurasian collection now, because that more accurately addresses its scope. But certainly when we were putting the exhibit together, that was a pretty unwieldy way to name something. So I might throw it over to Liliya now, because we did talk quite a bit about how to scope things and sort of what we would be talking about when we talked about Slavic collections in the context of this exhibit.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I guess that for us, it was a real challenge, because on the one hand, we really wanted to, showcase the gems that we were able to find. And some of those materials are quite extraordinary. But then on the other hand, we really struggled with, being honest. So how can we exhibit certain materials, as actually you can see on the screen right now, in Kyrgyz or in Tatar or many other languages. For example, on the screen now you see drawings by the Jewish painter Issachar Bak, who was actually often writing in Yiddish. So how can we address these languages and these cultures, which all come under this umbrella title of Slavic languages, but go far beyond that definition? So we really struggled with it a lot. And I think that one of the ways we kind of decided to deal with it was, one, acknowledging our own expertise and knowledge, because both of us are Russian speakers. And even though we were really conscious of the imperial legacy of Russia and how Russian language often erased other cultures or largely dominated it in our understanding of the region, we still were Russian speakers. And so we had to just acknowledge our own expertise. So that was one of the reasons. But then the other reason we started to focus on the materials we decided to focus on was actually to question what materials were collected. And the Russian language collection at Yale is actually the 7th largest linguistic collection at Yale. And it is by many times exceeds, for example, the Polish collection, which is the next large Slavic collection at the Yale libraries. So we were honest not only to our own expertise, but also to the materials that were held by the library. We also had to acknowledge the fact that we will not be able to cover even, the tiniest tip of an iceberg of the Slavic collections, because only the Russian language material collection consists of more of 160,000 items, and then the Polish one consists of more than 70,000 items. So it was clear that we have to, make some decisions without actually knowing what materials we were never going to even find or showcase. But at least we decided to acknowledge those limitations and to explore why the materials that were collected by Yale were collected by Yale. How did they arrive to the library? Who was interested in exhibiting or curating and collecting these particular objects, and what stories the objects we were able to showcase were telling us, or not telling us sometimes.
Great. And both of you sort of, I think, touched on the scope of the collections, both in terms of geography, as well as just literally the scope within the collections here. So clearly there's a lot. Clearly you came upon things that you didn't know before. And so I wonder if you could talk some in that process, what surprised you the most in your own discovery as you were surveying the collections across campus?
Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead.
Well, I think that clearly we both are excited to tell many stories about that experience. I'll just pick one that I think has been sort of my flagship story about the experience of putting this exhibit together. Sort of to continue the point from your last question, part of what guided us in putting the exhibit together was that we both have a certain aesthetic sensibility. We are very interested in materiality of objects. The space itself lends itself to, showcasing a certain type of item. Certainly it has a lot of, it's a great place to showcase visual appeal of objects. So we were certainly drawn to things that were highly visual and highly accessible to a wide audience. And part of that was certainly, looking for things, consciously seeking things that would be surprising, that would be interesting, that would, prompt a viewer to look at something and say, I didn't know that libraries had this. And I think that a number of objects on display sort of have that kind of appeal to them. One of the ones that I was really excited about that is on this particular slide, and I have the library's actual original catalog card for it on that slide for reasons I'll explain in a moment. That is the Ostrog Bible, the first printed Slavonic Bible in Church Slavonic, sort of a landmark of Slavic printing history, the Slavic Gutenberg, you might call it. Yale has had a copy of that Bible since the 1950s. I actually first came across an entry about it in a bibliography published in 1960 of sort of survey of Slavonic books in American libraries. And once I actually started working at Yale, I tried everything I could think of to find it in the catalog, and I couldn't find it. I had no idea how we cataloged it, that I couldn't, come up with it no matter how I searched for it. But I knew that we had it. And at some point, a colleague actually emailed me asking about it. So that was sort of my final cue to actually go looking for it in earnest. And the only thing I could think to do was to go to the original card catalog in our archive, where it's still kept in its original drawers. And I found the card for the Ostrog Bible. It was there. And I found its call number. And the only explanation I could think of was in the 1980s, when our catalog was being converted from cards into an electronic catalog, was that somebody missed the card when they were typing in all of the entries to go into the new Orbis, our electronic catalog. So I went to the Beinecke, where I imagined the Ostrog Bible must still be living. And I asked the staff at the circulation desk to go down and see if they could find a book with that call number. And they did. It was just sitting in the Beinecke vault, untouched for about 30 years, because it was not in our electronic catalog. So as far as most users are concerned, we don't own it. So certainly for me, one of the most exciting things to do as part of this exhibit was to get it recatalogued in Orbis so that it's now accessible to anybody that wants to look at it. And then to also bring it out on display as an example of the really beautiful craftsmanship of early Slavonic printing, particularly since this is considered to be a landmark of Ukrainian printing in particular. Ivan Fyodorov, the printer, is associated with Ukraine. So it was sort of a moment to want to display something that really spoke to Ukrainian heritage. I'll throw it over to Liliya to talk about some of the things that
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Anna said, both of us were really willing to show some of the unexpected objects, and a personal surprise for me was to discover non-textual objects at the library, things like clothes, locks of hair, which apparently tend to be pretty popular in libraries, but I did not know that. You know, works of visual art or other types of ephemera. So in many cases, we discovered that the stories of these objects were as surprising as the objects themselves. So I decided to focus on two examples. So the first encounter, or surprising encounter, occurred to me, happened when I was working with the Nina Berberova's archive at the Beinecke. And in this archive, I discovered objects like Zinaida Gippius's powder box and a small decorated notebook, Dmitry Merezhkovsky's letter opener, and Vladislav Khodasevich's cigarette box, wallet, his lock of hair, and 2 franc coins that were placed on his eyes after he passed away. When the reason why and you can actually see some of these objects on the screen right now. So my surprise had different dimensions to it. First, I was holding very private and sometimes very macabre objects that I didn't expect to find in a library. Second, these objects belong to some of the most famous poets of the Russophone world of the beginning of the 20th century, about whom I learned in seminars at Yale and admired their works. These objects were saved by their friend and a fellow writer, Nina Berberova, and were stored at the library like modern-day relics of literary celebrities. But when looking more closely at the objects, I started to see that in some cases, they convey different and often unexpected qualities to their owners. So for example, the Zinaida Gippius, the poet, was known for her complex play with gender identities and androgynous self-image. And yet her delicate and elaborate powder box, which became the main image for this exhibition, and her notebook convey more traditionally feminine facets of her personality, which was very surprising and unexpected to me, at least. Another example is Vladislav Khodasevich's lacquered cigarette box. And that was surprising because Khodasevich is known for his sophisticated modernist poetry. And here I was holding this very cliched image of Russianness, which kind of didn't really fit in with the modernist persona I was imagining. So as I already mentioned, all of these objects were part of Nina Berberova's archive at the Beinecke. And Berberova, who at one point was married to Khodasevich, was herself a member of the first wave of Russian emigres who fled Russia after the 1917 revolution. It is from her books and memoirs that we learn a great deal about the lives of these writers in immigration. After 1991, she received an honorary, after arriving to the US, Berberova taught at different American institutions, including Yale. And in 1991, she received an honorary degree here. And probably after that, she decided to give her archive to Yale. So what was most fascinating to me was how these objects contained in miniature memories about some of the most dramatic events of the 20th century, but they were also curating a very particular image of their previous owners. And my second surprise occurred when we were working at the Yale Historical and Medical Library, and were able to locate 6 wonderful etchings from around 1820 promoting vaccination against the smallpox. Now, the title of these prints, when translated to English, reads as Arguments and Boasts Between the Poke-Marked from Stubbornness and the Smooth-Skinned Who Listen to Their Parents. These prints were distributed by the 19th century Russian officials among the peasant population, encouraging them to get vaccinated. In each of these prints, the vaccinated and therefore smooth-skinned and nice-looking people mock their unvaccinated peers for their poke-marked skin. Now, I was shocked to discover that the medical library, which was an unusual place for Slavists, or at least for many of my fellow students or people I work with, to work in. So I was surprised that this library held such treasures, so interesting for us as Slavists, but genuinely unknown to the public. Of course, our fascination with these prints was partially inspired by the 21st century reality. We found these prints amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, when much of the public discourse surrounded vaccination and issues of public health. So we're extremely surprised by the relevance of these prints to our own times. Moreover, these prints allowed us to showcase some old examples of visual communication between the state and its people, which became crucial and more popular in its later Soviet iteration. So I guess I'll stop at that.
That's great, thank you. The exhibition, for those who've had a chance to see it, and again, I encourage everybody who can to make it to the Hanke Gallery at Sterling Memorial Library. I put in the chat a link to the information about the dates for the show. But those who've seen it, those who will see it, know that it's organized in various themes. And I wonder if you could talk some about how, as you were putting the show together, you came to the themes and maybe talk about one or two of them.
Sure. So that was, again, one of many challenging aspects of a challenging project is, thinking about when you're working with something as large as Slavic collections across the library, how to sort of group them in ways that feel narratively coherent, that tell your viewer some sort of story, even if that story isn't linear, as exhibitions, often but not exclusively are. I think that the theme of the exhibition as a whole really anchored us. Liliya talked really wonderfully about Zinaida Gipius's powder box, and it became sort of our main image because of this idea that the library and the archive preserves what we know and what we remember in all these ways that we don't even notice, that we don't even see until many years later, once somebody's legacy has been shaped and calcified and preserved in a certain way. You go into the archive, you go into an archive, and you still pull out something that is so intimately connected to who a person was that surprises you. Not only because it might, contradict or complicate your image of who that person is, but also because it was preserved by them or by somebody else. It was a way that, somebody wanted to remember the past. And I think that in many ways became one of our guiding principles, and one of the ways that we also sort of thought about and interrogated the collection as we worked, like we said earlier. So, for example, one case deals to some extent with imperial legacies when we're talking about Russia and the Soviet Union. These were empires that encompassed a great many, peoples, ethnicities, languages. And the way that our collections have been shaped and structured certainly reflect those places' own images of themselves, as well as, the American image of what we thought those places were. One image that is not on display here in the slideshow that is in the exhibit is a deck of cards from Beinecke's Carrie Playing card collection. That literally has it's a set that was produced in the 1870s, and literally every card has a person from a specific region of the Russian Empire in their native dress. It lists all of the main cities in that region, And on the back of the card, there's a little map of where the region is with its distance from St. Petersburg and Moscow listed. So the entire deck is sort of, the empire in miniature. It's very explicitly positions St. Petersburg and Moscow as the center of this particular universe, and how all of these people are sort of satellites that orbit it. So that struck us as sort of a good representative object of what we were trying to say in that particular case. We also had things like one of the images that you'll see in the show, in the slideshow that's playing right now, is a Kyrgyz language poster that was designed by Alexander Rodchenko in the 1920s, alongside a Russian Tatar primer that taught Russian speakers Tatar and vice versa from the 1830s. And these sort of speak to different periods of interaction with Central Asia in those two different imperial histories. During the Russian Empire, Kazan, where that primer was printed, was a big educational center. It was a big trade center. Russian and Tatar speakers had a tremendous amount of interaction. And that primer actually had somewhere in the teens or 20s, many editions. It was printed many times over. But our copy is the only one you can find in WorldCat, in the sort of world catalog system that a lot of libraries use. So it really speaks to how these immensely popular and important publications, when they're coming out of the periphery, have really disappeared, especially in centers of learning that tend to collect these things. Even we don't really have that many copies. Yale's the only one that has theirs cataloged. And the poster also speaks to this other moment in imperial history in the early Soviet period, where the Soviets were really trying to connect with all of their imperial subjects and to speak to them in their vernacular languages and encourage them to express their ethnic identity, sort of a different way of encompassing your empire, but then at the same time putting yourself at the center of it, because all of these posters were about the history of the Communist Party. They were translated from Russian. They were created by a Russian artist. So that case sort of tried in miniature to explore some of the complexities of how empire is reflected in collections that collect the world, let's say. And then the current slide reflects sort of the flip side of that particular case, at least the item on the left, the Caucasus roller coaster ticket from the Paris World's Fair Exposition in 1900. There's actually a full case of sort of Russian vogue in early 20th century France. And that case really speaks to sort of the pastiche version of Slavic and Russian worlds that were really trendy, that were fashionable, that people imagined or conceptualized the Russian Empire to be. So you sort of see both sides of how that part of the world has been collected throughout time at Yale. You see the internal version, the imperial version of what we are and how we present ourselves, and then the sort of imagined Western idea of what these places are when we absorb it and then sort of reflect it back. So those are two example cases. Lita, do you want to mention any that you worked on?
Sure. So one of the areas where the library is particularly strong is collections of immigrants. Throughout the 20th century, many people left either Russia or the Soviet Union throughout different immigration waves, and many of them arrived to the US. And so I already mentioned Nina Berberova and her fellow writers who all fled Russia after the revolution. And so the library has extensive archives of those people, not all of them, or many of them not necessarily from Russia. We have, for example, Czesław Milosz's archive, who left Poland. But so yeah, we felt that it is really important to showcase this theme of immigration in the 20th century from the Eastern Bloc. I would say that on a more personal note, as an immigrant myself, I felt very close to this particular topic. And so, yeah, that's how the immigration case came into being. And also it allowed us to showcase those incredible ephemeral objects I was mentioning earlier, because they all belong to those very important literary figures who were also immigrants or displaced individuals or however we decide to refer to them. So that was one example. And then another theme we decided to depict was related to the Romanov, the imperial house of the Romanovs, because again, or Yale has a very large and sometimes surprising collection of objects that used to belong to the Romanovs and were collected or arrived to Yale because after the revolution, either people who fled Russia were selling objects that they had for various reasons of the Romanovs, just because they needed to support themselves. But also the Soviet Union itself was selling many of those imperial objects because it was using the money for building, its various enterprises. So that's how many Western institutions have collections of the Romanovs, but Yale specifically has a really incredible collection with some very, very famous items, like the 6 photo albums held at the Beinecke of the Romanovs family, where Tsar Nicholas was photographing his own family at very private moments. And these were exhibited before our exhibition, and they are extremely known objects, but we're also showing some less known objects like Alice in Wonderland, which belonged to the Romanovs' children, and some of the illustrations, as you can see in the slideshow, were hand-colored. Now, we cannot argue for sure, but based on the way these illustrations are hand-colored, it seems that they were colored by the princess and princesses themselves, because after all, they were not only royals, but children who treated their books sometimes as toys that, you can just play with, or material objects. Oh, we can actually see it here. And so some of those illustrations are skillfully hand-colored, and some of them, as the example you can see here, are, more avant-garde or more like liberal in their treatment of the illustration. So we felt that it is a really interesting moment to reflect on how the imperial family is perceived, both in Russia or the Eastern Bloc and in the West, but also the different stories that these objects tell. Some of them are very private, treating these people as, just a family, but also their political implications, of course. So that was another theme we had.
Thank you both. I wanted to ask about some of the other items we've been seeing. And again, I think it really shows what a great job you've done of mining across the collections across campus, and how great it is to have this gallery that brings together all of Yale Library collections and allows them to be showcased. So you noted, for example, finding something in the Medical Historical Library. People have been seeing among the images in the slideshow items from the papers, the Claude McKay collection, and the show includes items also from Langston Hughes in both the McKay collection and the Hughes papers, of course, part of the James Weldon Johnson Memorial Collection of African American Arts and Letters. I wonder if you could talk some about those McKay items and maybe bring Hughes in too, and mid-century connections of Black American artists and writers in the Soviet times, and what those objects that you have on display tell us, the kind of windows that they open up.
Absolutely. Those objects are actually a sort of counterpoint case to our emigre case, because one of Yale's other incredible strengths, particularly spanning sort of the years between 1917 and 1932, give or take, are Americans who traveled to the Soviet Union early in its history and brought back incredible things. Immense records of what it was like there at the time. And the James Weldon Johnson collection is particularly special in that regard, because the sort of luminaries of the Harlem Renaissance and the other writers and poets that traveled there really are an even more amazing a record of what they in particular saw as, in most cases, sort of honored guests of the Soviet Union, people that they wanted to treat well and wanted to really impress with how they were treated there, with what they could do there, and with just what they could see and experience. I know a little bit more about Hughes's trip than about McKay's trip. I know that McKay went there as an invited speaker, as an emissary of the American Communist Party, and his membership card alongside a photograph of him speaking at the Kremlin are two of the things that are in the exhibit. I wanted to put so much more of Hughes's papers in there because his trip is extraordinarily well documented in his papers. Sounded like quite an extraordinary experience. He was there in theory to make a film, a Soviet propaganda film about race relations in the United States called Black and White. He traveled there with a coterie of other African-American writers, performers, artists who were all meant to go make this film together. Once they actually arrived in the Soviet Union and started working on it, they realized that the filmmakers did not have a very good grasp on what U.S. race relations were really like. And apparently, the script called for them to do some fairly ridiculous things. And when the African American writers and actors pushed back on some of this, the project just sort of eventually fell apart, and the film was never made. But Hughes was offered the opportunity to continue sort of touring around the Soviet Union while he was already there. Everybody was sort of offered the option of either going home or staying and, looking around. And Hughes decided that he wanted to stay, and he particularly wanted to visit Central Asia, which was not a region that many tourists were really allowed to go at the time. His visit was certainly curated to a large extent as he was traveling through that region. But he still, managed to spend significant amounts of time in places that few others who went to the Soviet Union did. He spent significant time in Turkmenistan, for example. He got to see and work on a cotton plantation to see what it was like, and to meet the local workers who were running the unions there. He got to spend time with locals. He got to photograph all kinds of new infrastructure, and sort of the way that people were working and living in those regions. So he came away with sort of a wealth of fantastic documentation, much of which I would have loved to put on display, but in some cases was too big to fit into the cases. He brought back, among other things, from Turkmenistan, a spectacular colorful poster in Turkmen language, encouraging propagation of silkworms for the textile industry there. And it's a beautiful piece, one that I would love actually to pair with some material from our Peabody Museum of Natural History someday, because they have an incredible array of textiles and souvenirs from Central Asia, as does the Yale Art Gallery. But that might be fodder for a future exhibit. All this to say that the James Weldon Johnson collection is actually, I think, sort of an until recently underexplored resource for early Soviet history, and one that hopefully more Russian and Soviet historians and historians of Central Asia will explore in further detail. I know that there are several faculty members who are already using it in their teaching a fair amount, and it never fails to fascinate.